Welcome to our educational webinar with California ReLeaf, improving your planning program through tree health monitoring with our special guest speaker, Doug Wildman. We're so excited that you could join us today. I wanted to take the opportunity to tell you a little bit about California ReLeaf, in case you weren't familiar. We are a nonprofit statewide organization, and our mission is to assist in four main program areas. We have a network of over 75 organizations, network members who do urban tree planting. So we help convene peer-to-peer learning opportunities. We do advocacy on the state level, speaking for trees. We also provide pass-through grants for various tree planting and care programs, as well as educational opportunities like this one. So we're so pleased that you could join us today. Our special guest speaker is Doug Wildman, and I'm going to introduce you to him now. He graduated from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo with a degree in landscape architecture. Doug holds a architectural license and an ISA arborist certification and the urban forest certification. He's also a Bay friendly qualified landscape design professional. Doug has served on the executive board of California Urban Forest Council, including as president. He co-chaired the combined California ReLeaf and the California Urban Forest Council Annual Conference and co-chaired the Urban Wood Utilization Conference. Doug is currently serving on the board of Western Chapter International Society of Arboriculture as past president. Doug worked for 20 years with a nonprofit tree planting organization in San Francisco on programs to improve San Francisco's urban forests and to help bond neighborhoods through community-based urban forestry. Currently, Doug works as a consulting arborist and landscape architect in the San Francisco Bay Area. And Doug utilizes his environmental and arboricultural background in his designs, which range from large-scale residential to commercial office parks, from community-based design to single client collaboration. So thank you so much, Doug, for being here today. And before I turn it over to you, I wanted to let everyone know that following Doug's presentation, we're going to have time for question and answers. You are welcome to, as we go, to put your questions in the chat. Our urban forestry consultant, Colleen Ravden with Urban Ecos, she'll be helping monitor the chat as well as to help us facilitate questions and answers at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, Doug, I'm going to turn it over to you. So thank you so much.
Cool. I really thought I shortened that bio that I sent you. I sent the wrong one. Anyway, that was long. Nice to be here today. I'm really happy to share some of these things. I really think that health monitoring is an important part of your tree planting. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And hopefully by the end of the session, you'll be saying, yeah, we really should do it, or we'll continue to do it because you already do. So you guys can see my screen, right? This is just a cool shot of San Francisco, kind of a fisheye, but so today, I'm acknowledging everyone's planning in a lot of different places, from heavy urban areas, really impacted areas, to schools and parks and open spaces. There are high winds. There's a lot going on. There are even, critters. So we do a lot. We plant in a lot of different places. But at the end of the day, what is your goal? Of course, we're providing healthy trees, and of course, they're the appropriate species for these locations, and they're planted in the best sites. I mean, this is why we're doing what we do, and we work so hard at learning about trees and the sites and soils, and so much to do just to do this right. But we might also look at tree care visits, and I know some of you already do. And what is your establishment period? Is it 3 years after the planting? You want to make sure those trees are in good shape and you keep checking on them. And then, or is it 5 years? I'd argue that it takes about 5 years to establish a young tree. And then what can you actually offer? Well, maybe you can't go to 5 years. You barely have time to do a couple of visits after the tree is planted with your staff and funds and such. And you also might consider with your grants what you can write into the grants if tree care is one of those items and fund it. So programmatically, how do you get there? That's something for you to think about maybe during the session. I need to move this menu bar out of the way. There we go. So how can tree health data collection help you? Well, we plant trees in a lot of different places. So the species that perform well in some won't perform well in others. So learning about the best performing species and where they perform. Also the worst performing species, find out if really trees are not faring well and they're really not worth planting. The percentage of survival is so low, even though you love that tree to death, it's just not the right tree. You might limit it to certain areas because it really does best only in certain limited areas. So the other thing is your planting practices. If you look at the tree to the right, that's a tree in maintained turf area. And if anyone saw my last presentation, we talked about, there's a lot of impacts in turf, whether they're lawnmowers or weed whackers, to keep that turf just so, and that standing water. But I got to say that those stakes, 3 stakes around it, do help protect it. So that might be a good detail in turf areas to use 3 stakes. The other is you want a benchmark so that ideally you might improve your tree health over time and year to year look at your trees. We're going to do a few polling questions. Here are a couple of them. And the first one is, and I think I'll do it this way, right? Here we go. I'm launching poll question number 1, which is, what type of data storage or databases do you use? What does your organization use? So if you'd quickly respond, I'm gonna end the poll after a couple of seconds here. Just want to have a sense of it. Okay, it's still being answered. Keep going. 22 out of 42. Keep going, keep going. I see a lot of you are using Excel. That's great. Access was something we used to use, but it was dynamite. I really enjoyed it. Salesforce has some freebies to get you involved, engaged, but after 10 you have to pay. Tree Plotter is out there too, and we'll talk a little bit. And other proprietary. Okay, I'm ending the poll. So we have, I'm sharing the results. I'm saying this out loud so I know what I'm doing. So a lot of people use Excel and Google Sheets and Salesforce Tree Plotter. Thank you. That's great. Now I'm going to end. Let's see, I got to go to polling question 2. I'm a little rusty here. Polling 2 is, do you collect this health data currently? So if you could quickly respond to that, it gives me a sense on who I'm talking with and what organizations are doing. My sense last time was most did not collect health data on trees after they've been planted. And you got to think about the intervals too. When are you going to visit the trees? When are you going to see these trees? And so that's important. After 5 years, your statistics might not be as good as after 3 years or 1 year after planting. Okay, I'm ending this poll and I'm sharing the results. So we can see that, sometimes people do. And no for about 9 of them, 13 do. So hopefully after this session, you guys might consider how can I get rid of the poll? Do people see the poll or did it go away?
You can just exit out, Doug, on the X on your screen, and then we can move forward. It's disappeared from our screens. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. So it's not X. Oh, there it is. Sorry, everyone. I've got too many banners. So like people have said, if you don't know what your urban forest consists of, how can you manage it? How could you really know if you don't know the species, don't know how they're doing, where they're planted? So by the same token, I really think that without knowing the health condition of your trees at different intervals, whether it's 1 year, 3 or 5 years, you can't really manage it or improve your program. So I do think that this collection of data and some reason codes to have you analyze the data is really important to lead to healthier trees. And that leads to larger grants and contracts and other projects. So really knowing your product is very important, knowing what you can do. So improve your tree survivorship. It's not enough just to have surviving trees. It's important to have them be healthy and surviving. Okay, what data points are you going to collect? I just cut and pasted the top, all these data fields from some survey that was done in San Francisco, and there are 40 other additional fields. These are a lot of fields. I mean, they are important if you have a rise in concrete, your paving has a trip hazard or their overhead lines, but really, what are we looking for here? We're looking for just simple data collection on the health of your trees, and that's what we'll be talking about. So don't collect what you're not going to use. A way to collect it is data sheets. If you have some sort of database, whether it's Excel or Access or Salesforce, you could print out the fields that you need. And if it's the owner, property owner, which happens to be the Unified School District and their location, these happen to be all fruiting trees. And we have a note that we're going to prune those trees for 3 years. And that's free, it's been paid for. And that when we did the work, it's important to say, you know, when you did your tree care, and then the reason spaces to put your reason codes and your status codes. So if you look on the left, from very healthy, number 1, to dead and gone, number 5, you're rating these trees. There are only 5 categories. There are others that have 7 categories, but I think it's there's room for error, and it's really quite simple to keep it to, it's almost like the letter code for rating your students, A through F. So those are some of the, we'll look at the reason codes later, but remember, 1 is healthy and dead and gone is another. So you could also do it on tablets. We mentioned your handheld tablets out there, or just your phones these days and pulling an application. This is Planet Geo. Again, I'm not advocating anything. I think they have some nice graphics. But if you have your data living already in a database, you could use it in whatever way. It's whatever you feel works best for you. So there are also applications. Yeah, I saw this one online the other day. This is a Texas A&M app. It's free. It's graphically really nice. You could drop your pin where your tree is on the aerial and pull down menu for species. But I read a lot of reviews that were negative about it, and in part, it's slow to download and such. So there are some things that are positive with in the field data collection with handheld devices and data sheets. Here's just a snippet of, this is, if you look on the left margin, there's different districts in San Francisco, the Bayview district, Excelsior, and so on the left. And if you look at the far right, you have percentages of those 1s and 2s, the very healthy and the good rated trees, 1s and 2s. So for instance, if we zoom in on just the Bayview, we have 4 species. And of the 1s and 2s, 69% of those trees planted over that time period at year 3 were in good health or better. And then if you look at specific species, you'll see that some didn't rate as well, the magnolias and such. So you could zero into the species, which is kind of fun. I did this data just last night from some old data. It's 5 years worth of data. Only 92 Agonis flexuosa, the peppermint willow. It's combining with the dark star variety. So it might be interesting to pull them apart and see which does better, but it's the data set's not that large. But anyway, here's 92 trees. After 2 months, you can see the excellent and goods percentages, or excuse me, quantities. Those are just quantities. The percentages are right here in yellow. So at 2 months, this is your post-planting survey, making sure the volunteers and that day, that event went well. And you could raise the trees up if they're planted too deeply, do those quick fixes, but 88%, that's pretty good. But after 3 years, it drops to 74%. This is a fast-growing species. So this is a species that you would want to do annual tree care visits for, and there might be other species. I would include the elm, Chinese evergreen elm is one of those. And in that, you do your healthcare surveys. But if you look closely at the 2-year planning data, I'm missing a lot of data points. There are only 70 surveys out of 92 done, and that really affects the data. I would throw that out, and still valid, I think, is the 3-year 74% in 1s and 2s, and then 88 in the early 2-month. But now if you add 3 struggling, it's not that they could go either way, that those 3 categories, they could go into good or worse. So your percentages look amazing in orange, right? Those look great. What are you using? What are you using this data for? But ideally, you're trying to push those 3s into 2s and 1s and not lose them south. So some terms today, we're looking at those young trees. So the central leader is always key to getting it up and out of the way, especially when we're in sidewalks. So central leader is that dominant part of the tree that will be your permanent branching. A lot of our trees don't have permanent branching yet. So keeping that central leader intact to grow up is important. Retraining a central leader, looking to the left, we lose our top of our trees sometimes with vandalism or pruning. Someone might have done something bad to your tree. So retraining that central leader. We'll look at some trees photos later. Blue sky index is kind of fun. That's something that if you think, that canopy doesn't look very lush, very healthy. Well, it's missing leaves, or blue sky canopy is high. You can see the sky and you shouldn't. That's not typical of that species or of that health in that tree. The other thing is root flare. That taper, the trunk taper as it comes close to the ground and where the tree should be planted, right at the original line. And often nurseries add soil to their buckets, to their containers, because they're losing soil out the bottom. The tree sinks, and they just add it so it looks like everything's fine. But you'll want to check to see that your trees from the nursery, you can find that original depth of soil. So those are some of the terms we'll be talking about today. Here's one. We're going to rate this tree. Everyone get ready for a polling question. This is a young tree. This is a small leaf Tristania, and it is 18 months old. It's young, just planted. You might be able to wiggle that trunk a little and see if it's rooted, but not too much. It's pretty young. It still has a nursery stake on it, and that's something to remove. Not a big deal, but you'll want to make sure it's tied properly to the other stakes that you planted it with. And you're rating the tree because at the point of which you're going to remove the stake, make sure things are adjusted, and you're going to leave that tree. What does it look like after your work is done? So yeah, there's the trunk taper looks pretty good. I dug some soil away. How would you rate this tree, 18-month-old small leaf Tristania, after you do those? So I'm going to poll it here. Okay, here we go, polling 3. So if everyone would quickly, look at those shots, how would you rate it? Now, some people are strong graders, like, not many students get A's, it's a B, but you think about this tree as it relates to the neighborhood, the environment this tree is in. A tree planted in San Francisco may not look the same as a tree planted in Los Angeles, same species, but the heat, the drier climate may reduce the leaf diseases. And one might think it's looking really great in San Francisco, but that's a 2 in Los Angeles. So, okay, I'm going to end this poll and I'm going to share the results. A lot of people, yeah, I would agree. I think it's a 1, and one could argue 2. Like, yeah, I've seen bigger, healthier trees, but I would give it a 1. And so good. Thanks, everyone. Hope that was fun. It's kind of a tree tour today. The next slide, we're going to look at Magnolia grandiflora, little gem. And, it too is on that nursery stake. And that would be something you remove. And you're going to rate this tree after the nursery stake's been removed. The foliage looks lush green. It's radially symmetric, lots of branching. You might thin it out a little, but the thing looks healthy. This tree looks good. And the trunk, the taper looks good. And what's the benefit of buying a 24-inch box? This was a 24-inch box. It has a 2-inch diameter stake from the nursery. So you get all that soil and an extra stake as part of the deal. That's what you pay for. So, you know, how would you rate this tree? Actually, this is not a polling question. Do it by yourself here. Okay, I'm giving it a 1. What do you think, you guys? Wish we could have all your images up to see you all. But another one. This one's a lot more interesting. I think we have 3 trees in a row. Gives you some context. They're all 3-year-old trees. This is Quercus tomentella, an island oak. And they all have great taper. They're 3 years. They're rooted well, but they have different levels of their foliage, their density of foliage. So when you look at each tree closely, here's tree number 1. I'd say that blue sky index is up. It's missing leaves. You can see the dieback in some of the twigs at the top. You know, it's branching, isn't as lush, right, as that magnolia. It's a different species, but it's got okay branching. I think for an oak, we're okay. But mainly, you know, it's something about it's looking a little funny. There's a lot of reason codes there, but just generally, how would you rate this tree and what do you call out? Well, I'm calling out reason code 3. It's struggling. There's something going on. I can't identify it. I do know it's shaded by a large building, and this guy would love to have full sun or more light than it does, but generally a lack of vigor. I don't even have a Z code there, but lack of vigor, don't know why. Again, create your own reason codes based on what you're finding. Here's tree number 2. Blue sky index is way up. And you could see buds, it's trying to regrow. It's got some new leaves coming back. And there's a close-up of that. And you look closer and there's something going on here. This to me looks like powdery mildew and something we see on our coast live oaks. And to be honest, I didn't know it existed on our island oaks. So that was, apparently it can happen to all sorts of oaks, but that's probably explaining why tree number 2 had some issues, right? So how would you rate this tree? Same thing, 3. And there's that blight disease insects. Now, you may not know what's ailing your tree. You know it's something, and not everyone's a tree scholar out there. You might have volunteers helping collect this data, and that's great. That's why you have generalized categories like this. And I put leaf chlorosis. I don't know what's going on. But I do think it's that witch's broom kind of thing, the fungus. So here we go, tree number 3, all in a row. Same oak, 3 years old. Look at that foliage, looking good. Really lush, everything's looking great. Trunk taper, good. Again, all 3 of them are well rooted and such. And I did notice this, there's something going on with the trunk. Well, what is it? It looks like a completely healed scar. I see no canker, nothing. Big time infection, no issue. It's healed. I would not claim that as any issue with this tree. How would you rate this tree? I give it a 1. Here we go. We have 2 3s in front of this 1. So my concern would be that fungal issue might get blown down towards this tree. But he looks good. He looks very healthy. So here we go. This is a magnolia. And you'd never tell because you can't see it amongst all the canna lily. And it's lost a lot of leaves down below. Often these magnolias, the small little gems and such, have low branching. They're short from the nursery and a number 15. So that's not atypical, but you've got a lot going on. When someone builds a planter, a raised bed around a tree, it has a tendency to collect leaf litter and well, garbage for that matter, but the mulch addition could get buried right against the tree, and that is an issue, right? You don't want to change that level of grade against your trunk. So it's got some issues right off, and but it could be pruned back. You could leave a note for the owner. You're not going to probably change their garden. You might get some grief for that, but leaving them a note to remove the competition of the plants and rake away the soil from the crown of the tree. So I'd give it a struggling. There's some issues even after you do those fixes. So here, this one might be easy. Can you even see the tree? Well, it's got metal T-posts around it. It's gone. That tree is gone. It's a strawberry tree. You can tell by the bark. You don't really know why it's gone, but you give it a 5, a dead gone. You could give it some reason codes, but again, you don't really know. You could go back and check the 18-month survey. This is a 3-year-old tree. It might have shown some dieback. It might have gotten some phytophthora, some dieback that way, and then it eventually just succumbed. So, well, here's a strawberry tree. This guy looks a little better. The branching looks good. It's healthy. It's blooming. It does have that gator bag around it, or the watering bag around it. And again, we put those bags around the tree stakes, not the trunk of the tree. You don't want that moisture accumulating and killing your tree, especially this species. So again, radially symmetric. This is common, these whorls to a strawberry tree. In time, you'll remove some alternating ones. The trunk looks good, the taper, the color, it's rooted fully. After you remove that bag, everything's fine. So how would you rate this tree? 1 through 5. Okay. Oh, I think I lost the, well, I gave it a 1. Oh, there it is. It's covered by my banner. So it's a 1. It's healthy. This is a healthy tree. So here, this is not so healthy. Again, do we know why it died? We don't. Again, looking at that survey data might lead you to believe that, yeah, you've replanted this arbutus twice here. It's gotten phytophthora twice, maybe a different species altogether. Soils aren't draining. There are issues. So this one is a polling question. Take a look at this olive tree. It is a evergreen, excuse me, a fruitless olive. It's been lifted. If you look at the canopy, it's really not got any lower branching. And it's supported by that scabbed-on stake, which is actually a good way to support the canopy of a tree beyond the height of your tree stakes that you planted with. It looks like someone used zip ties, but it's holding onto the tip of the tree. You want to protect it, so that part's good. It is great. It's not planted too deeply, and it's got some trunk taper. How would you rate this tree? This is polling question number 4. And those are some thoughts. And I'm going to here. Okay, go ahead and give you just a few seconds here to log in. Oh, good as number 2 is looking strong. We got some very healthy, a couple struggling. What do we got? The polls are still coming in. This is exciting. It's fun when there's some competition here. Well, the majority, keep going. Anyone else? People are changing their polls. It looks like, okay, I'm closing this out. It looks like the majority say good, and some say very healthy, and I'm between 1 and 2. Struggling, it's got the vigor, it's got lots of good things. I wouldn't give it a struggling. So I'm gonna stop the poll. Let me see what I wrote up there. So I would give it a 2 with the reason codes that I bolded out. The damaged trunk, it's not really damaged. It's got some squirrel to it, squirrely. And likely it was on that big nursery stake for far too long and was leaning away from the stake. So that's probably why, but I think it was rooted firmly and just has too high a head. So poor structure. A lot of trees could get poor structure on some of this. So here we go. There's a little shade. It might be kind of hard to see this guy, but it's a maple. I don't know what variety. I do know that it lost its central leader. Look at that telephone in the background, telephone pole. That's where the central leader should be. It's missing. And instead it has a lateral branch that is dog-legging to the left there and up, and that's taken over for the central leader. So it's really got some structure problems, some issues that way. And I don't know, maybe the owner topped it, wanting to emulate their sycamore right there, the semi-pollarded tree. I don't know, but it's got some funky structure to it. you look at the trunk, and here's a great example of, well, that looks like a dowel, a perfectly uniform dowel straight into the ground. There's no trunk taper. And it's funny, I accidentally took a picture when I was on my bike of a telephone pole. And when trees look like telephone poles going into the ground, there's something wrong. So I did dig about 3.5, almost 4 inches down before I found the crown of the tree. And so it's really got excessive soil. It sank after planting, or just was planted too deeply. It's unclear. Remember that your auger, you don't want to, if you're augering tree pits, you don't want to set that auger too deeply. So polling question number 5, I'm launching this poll. And how would you rate this tree? Boy, right up, strong. Number 3, people are just not even hesitating. One is almost dead. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's, do you remove that tree and replace it? Sometimes you have to, you know, cut your losses. Some have a good. Okay, I'm gonna, any more? Okay. It's kind of fun, this polling thing. Okay, so majority have struggling, and I would agree that you could re-leader this tree. You could re-leader it, right? You could choose a lateral branch, remove that dog leg, and choose another lateral branch. And but you know, the too deep is really difficult to deal with. You'd have to remove soil, put a collar around the tree, but it is possible. So okay, very good. Glad you all are awake and enjoying our little tree tour. So status code 3. So here we go. Another maple. This one's interesting. We've got some included bark. We've got a tree stake rubbing against it, and a tag. You know, what could you do to fix this tree? It's a red maple. Well, I argue those 2 branches need removing. This guy is 3 years old, and after you remove those branches, you've got an okay central leader and some okay branching that looks pretty symmetric. It might need some steering, but you know, it's looking pretty good up there after you remove those 2 branches down below. So, you know, I would give it this poor structure generally, but you're going to fix it. So how are you going to leave it? I'd leave it as good. I think this is an okay looking maple, and after those pruning cuts, you're in good shape. Here's one. It's just a clip of me walking around the tree, and I want you to watch this. And on your own, you're going to rate this tree. It's a jacaranda mimosifolia. It's leaning. It's you know, something's going on. It has a tree grate. It was planted. That's how you do it. You plant them very deeply. It has a tendency to collect additional debris down there. So it does look like there's quite a gap. Soil's buried the crown of the tree, but it's also not rooting well. This guy's at least 3 years, and I think he's more like 4 or 5 years old. Sure, he could be restaked, but you'd need to remove that grate. You'd need to remove the soil and probably do some root pruning, be aggressive down there. And if it lives, great. If it doesn't, remove and replace. But the crown's not too bad. It has some co-dominant, a couple of strong central leaders, maybe reducing one of them and letting the other take over. And again, restaking it, getting it vertical, and definitely some root pruning. So kind of cool, a tree in a park and different condition, but it's fixable. How would you rate it? There's some reason codes, but yeah, I'd give it a 3. It's definitely got a weak trunk, planted way too deeply, and or accumulation of soil, and then poor rooting. It's got a lot of issues. So I'd say struggling. Okay, so we're just generally, you might know a lot about your trees and your programs and how you plant, but without collecting data and sharing, I think it's important to collect this data. We know that during big storms, that we lose certain species, and at least in San Francisco, we were losing some small leaf tristanias in the Brisbane boxes. and finding out that their root balls were compromised, a lot of circling roots. So training volunteers on those two species to root prune significantly is important. So you can learn that from your monitoring. Also, tree species that do well in sand, but not with prevailing winds. You find that they blow down because it takes them a while to root, and having those prevailing winds kind of prevent that. So you plant those species in protected sites, and they're fine. The other thing is vandalism. We do have it in certain tree planting sites, and planting faster species. Yeah, that makes sense. The tree is going to get bigger, stronger, up and out of the way sooner than something slow. Although, you know, a ginkgo is tough in urban environments, we know that. But thinking about a site that you're constantly replacing a tree in, you might change it up a little bit. Leaf diseases, well, you know, with already short-lived trees like the prunus, you know, cherries and plums and pears, so many leaf diseases that you might just reduce or stop planting altogether. You don't want short-lived trees out there to begin with. So here's something I think that I love our Chinese evergreen elms, and we're planting them a lot. They've got great carbon numbers, right? The speed in which they grow can be challenging for us to prune and maintain if you've got rocketing, you know, 3 and 4 foot lengths of branching growth each year. So can your volunteers prune effectively at the 2-year mark, at the 3-year mark or 5-year? And then also keep in mind, fast growing species do need a higher level of care. So it is, I believe, an annual pruning for this, for ulmus in most cases, that you're coming back and making sure you're in control. So if you're doing them at planting these at school districts, making sure that that fast growth, that they're able to maintain the tree and take care of it into the future. So remember that institutional knowledge is super important, and that sharing that with staff and volunteers, this data you're collecting is really important to maintain within the culture of your office or your organization. So if you could train volunteers on it, super. Using this tree health data will help you select trees, and that's what we're really trying to do here, and select the right tree for the right place with data to back it up. And it's going to save you time replacing it and money, and grant money. So this refined species list. So I do think that it's important to reduce the offerings to those best performers, but still have the diversity out there. So the data you collect from all this monitoring goes right back into those short lists, those lists you might offer a neighborhood or a block for planting trees. You also want to expand that list. We have some new species coming out, and oaks and different trees all the time, and some more droughty trees. So begin to use those, and then start taking data, collecting data on them to find out if they're working in your cities and where you're planting. So planting techniques. So your detail in planting trees, you're going to get information back. So if using 3 stakes is going to protect your tree in turf areas from mowers, you know, use them always in turf areas and maintained lawn. Trunk guards or additional screening to give them that much more resiliency to getting bumped. And also, we found that using 3 stakes in general helps your overall tree data, your health data, improve instead of 2 stakes and the issues that 2 stakes have. Non-treated stakes, I was really gung-ho on not using any sort of treatment, even though it was salts. I didn't want anything, and found out in 18 months they're snapped off, they're rotten. So, you know, don't use them. Always the treating, it's copper quate. It's a salt that's used now. It's not copper arsenate, so it's all fine. Your planting holes, again, if you're drilling that, sinking an auger and using an auger, some aren't, but don't be overzealous and go too deep with it, because your trees can sink quite easily in that. So you could paint with your marking paint on the top of your auger the depth that you want to sink it at, and you know, go around with the auger on each site. So some obstacles. Well, It's going to add a little time, sure, collecting this data, but I argue that it's super positive for all your planning program. Data sheets are, I think, a fast way to collect that data, but you got to remember there's volunteer or staff that are inputting that data when you get back to the office, and maybe there might be errors in that translation of the data sheet into the database. So using tablets and phones may reduce the errors. And then you really want to get together with your staff and volunteers and see several trees, several different species, and rate them and talk together how you're rating them, kind of like what we did today. And do this fairly consistently, maybe a couple of times a year, and that will improve your consistency in data collection. And then, you might step your game up and agree that 5 years to establish a tree is really what it should be, and stick with that tree in some form of tree care and pruning. If they're fast growers, you may be challenged to really do a great job on pruning that tree, but at least you can do something. And then that data collection at the 5-year point is super interesting and helpful for your planting program. You got to share these results. Make sure that your staff and volunteers know why you're doing what you do. So polling question number 6, I just want to find out if you're interested in collecting healthcare data on trees, and let me know. I'd like to know what you think. There's certainly some good reasons here to do it. Still populating. Yes, oh, that's so exciting. And we already do, and no one says no. That's nice. Well, very good. I'm going to share this poll. So that's great. I think there's so many positive things, and the amount of time is so little, especially when you're coming back to your trees to do some pruning and adjusting stakes and ties and such. So that was really quick today. I'm hoping to have enough time to have questions, and I really thank you very much and hope you got something out of this. So, okay, open it up to questions.
Hey, Doug, thank you.
Yeah,
I've been paying attention in the chat here. So
thank you.
if you have a question, you can type it in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we will take questions from both sides. We did have a couple questions in the chat. A lot of interest today about stakes, both the nursery stakes. So I know this is a little bit out of our topic today, but because we're done with a bit of time, I thought maybe we could tackle it. So when do you take off the nursery stakes? Because I think a couple of your pictures mentioned that.
Yeah.
And then also, could you recommend stakes, the other kind of stakes that don't rot?
Yeah. Yeah, well, the wooden stakes that don't rot are the treated 2-inch diameter lodgepole. They do in time, but usually that time is long enough to establish the tree. You've got them for 3 to 5. In some cases, they never rot. It's amazing. But there's also the ready stake, the steel stakes. And I'm not a fan of them. I think a 1-point or even 2-point connection on a single plane is not as good. So I like the wood stakes, even though it looks like you're planting 3 trees for one. So it's busy that way. The nursery stake is interesting. I think in most cases you want to remove it, period. I could think of olive trees as being one of those species where it's often a whip. It's literally nurseries have stripped them up. There's a little lollipop at the top, and my gosh, you need to use something. So in some cases you could remove all that nursery tape, that green tape, so it's not so tight to that nursery stake. Leave it on, leave it at 1 point attached maybe, but or with soft tie back to your 3 wooden stakes and really support it and remove it all together. But the critical part is keeping that central leader. If a nursery stake can help you do that by scabbing onto your existing lodgepole pine stakes you installed with the planting, that's good, like that image earlier. So save those nursery stakes. You might use them later, and bamboo's fantastic. So save bamboo and use that.
And we just had a follow-up question of what
Yeah.
is meant by treated in terms of stakes.
Yeah, and it was really hard to find untreated these days, but I did, and it, like I said, was not a success. Treated is with copper quate. It's a salt. It's basically a salt, and it's like when you go to Home Depot and you're buying treated wood, they impregnate it with something to prevent insects and rot from getting into the tree. So it only penetrates, you know, an eighth to a quarter inch max into that stake, but it's not what it used to be, which was toxic copper arsenate. So it's treated, and yeah, ACQ, I think, is the trade name.
We've got a hand raised, Kate Riley. Kate, do you want to unmute yourself? I'm not actually sure. Megan, can people unmute themselves? Oh,
Yes, they can.
okay. So Kate, if you want to go ahead, jump in.
Just a real fast thing, which is, you know, I appreciate the recording is being done, but I also love the slides, and I'd love to be able to share the slides with our community group so that to show, you know, I've been trying to do this with our tree project since we started like 8 years ago, and I can't really get a lot of interest from the community because they love the planting. That's the fun part. And so I'm so pleased to know that there's data to back this idea of the importance of monitoring. And so for that reason, if you could share your slides, that would be super great.
Yeah, I think it's up to ReLeaf. You know, I think I'd like to share my slides. That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Megan. I'm the education program manager here at California ReLeaf, and I'd be happy to work with Doug in making that available, as well as the recording. We're going to have it on our website as well as our YouTube channel. So if you aren't already a subscriber on our YouTube channel, we invite you to do that.
Thank you so much.
All right, back to the chat questions. Kate, I just want to say, I think the follow-up, I love the data collection part more than I like digging a hole in the ground. So we're out there. Don't despair.
Right.
We had a question, Nicholas Clavel. I might ask you to clarify a little bit here, but the question says recommendations for raising established trees 5 to 10 years that have been identified as too low. So I think this is a practical pruning question about how do we lift up those lower.
Oh my gosh. Oh, the branching. I at first was thinking planted. Is it the tree planted too low?
Oh,
yeah. Is that what it is, that the root ball was planted too low?
Nicholas, you want to jump in and unmute yourself? And you're probably right, Doug. It's not particularly hard to cut the lower branches, so I bet you're right. That was.
Yeah. So I mean, that is really a problem. How do you do that in a
here? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah. Sorry to clarify. I mean, planted too deep. We see trees that the flare looks low and they're struggling and they kind of stagnate growth. I even have some 10, 15-year-old trees that I know they're struggling and they're kind of too big. You know, the root system is established, and I don't know if you have a recommendation for
well, you know, some species
or excavation and raising.
It kind of depends on species too. If it's too old, you can't do much, right? If you see that the tree is not rooted and you have movement, I would call that, you know, a hazard. That the tree, you need to replace that tree if it's really challenged that way. But some species, you know, whether it's sycamores or other, you know, creek type trees, they could grow adventitious roots and do fine, right? So other species like the arbutus and madrone or oaks, they're not going to like that. And so without removing some of that soil, and how do you do it in a planting basin, in a pit, you might be able to in a landscape or a park strip, kind of reduce that soil depth. But at some point you have to call it. And that's a pretty old tree you're looking at. So if it's not rooted, I'd be concerned if it's not rooted at this point, and it might be because of that. Yeah.
I see. Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
I'm gonna, Alex Bink has got a hand raised. So I'm jumping back and forth between the raised hands and the chat.
Yeah, hi. I'm an arborist with the Sacramento Tree Foundation. I run our monitoring program here. I'm just curious if there is or would be interest in some kind of, I don't know exactly, but like community data portal or something to share all this information that we're collecting. Because I think one of the challenges that we have is we have all this data, but we don't have that much statistical expertise on staff here. And so we're not, we look at it, but we're not totally sure what to do with it. And I think also just having information from other organizations would be really useful, especially in terms of, new tree species that are coming onto the scene that, maybe sound promising, but we don't know if they're not planted in our region yet.
Yeah, great question. Sharing your data with someone to help you analyze it. I can't help but think maybe Igor with the UC extension might be someone. If there's specific data that is standing out and you're not sure why. So, okay. I was finding here in San Francisco, we love our they're Catalina ironwoods, right? But they're dying. 50% of them live, the other 50% die. They get Phytophthora all the time. So is that a tree to plant a boulevard with? Well, maybe not, but maybe onesie twosies. And so is this substantiated? Well, can you share this to the point where they're not planted in boulevards, or do you know for sure it's Phytophthora? And actually, Igor helped me take some data samples. It was hard to find that tissue to sample well, but we really suspect Phytophthora with the Catalina ironwood. So, and we know that our Arbutus marina, we've got some problems with them in Phytophthora. So there's some species that people do know if they're a little bit in the tree loop to help you with this. So if you're species specific and you have issues or data, I think you can find out from sources like the UC extension or other arborists in your area. And maybe, Megan, through the ReLeaf network, is there a way to post like, hey, I've got these issues. Anyone have the same or know anything about it? Is there some sort of...
I think this is a perfect idea for a CAL FIRE grant, a piece of a CAL FIRE grant. So, because it sounded to me like Alex was talking about a data portal where we could all sort of dump our data and get a bigger picture.
Yeah.
And just what we might see in our own city. So, yeah, I'm gonna take that idea and run with it. Alex, don't be surprised if you hear from me.
Awesome. Yeah, loop me in, because I think it's a great idea. And like I said, there's just a lot of stuff that hasn't been tried, in our local area, so nobody knows about it. But I'm sure there might be other experiments or new trees happening, sort of in a broader context. So it might be useful for us to work together.
Yeah.
Not have to each do our own science, to find the same thing.
Yeah. And actually in that portal, it might be good to, where do you find these new species? So that's always been the question, right? We want to plant some new species, and where do we find them? So I think the UFI site, I thought they had Urban Forest Ecosystem site had nurseries on that to find certain species. I'm not sure where that is.
And then just to jump in, Doug, on your point about the ReLeaf network, the ReLeaf network exists to help with peer-to-peer learning. And so if you're not already a California ReLeaf network member, definitely go on our website, and I'll share that in the link to learn more about our organizations and ways that you can get involved.
And we've got, I'm gonna hit you, Doug, with two last practical questions. Well, first of all, one person asked what we would recommend for data collection. And I feel like part of the answer that's come out of this is we don't have a great answer. There are big, expensive things. There are small, free, buggy things.
Yeah.
But maybe that's probably another good thing for, we could use that as another topic for the ReLeaf network to share information about.
Yeah, it could be. The Access database was something years ago that I really loved. And when we changed to Salesforce, it was a little glitchy, and we lost a lot of the features, which I thought were graphic features. When you print out a data sheet, how it looks and how you work with it. But anyway,
Well,
there's,
I'll throw out one thing. High up in the chat, we have Cynthia Wu from Google X, who is building a project, who's got a free pilot on a tree monitoring project, and she's put her email address in the chat. So
ooh,
Cynthia, an email is coming to you from me because I'm fascinated. But anybody else who wants to chime in there, who'd like to reach out, it's way at the top. So probably the fourth or fifth comment in the chat.
Yes, I'll thank you so much for plugging that, and I'll repost it in case people didn't see it back when I first posted it. Thank you so much, and I'd love to connect with anyone from here. This has been a great talk.
Great, thank you.
good.
I think that puts us right at 2:59. So,
Oh my goodness. Well, 2:59 your time.
oh, sorry.
Where's that
I'm always
snow?
trying to pretend like I'm not here and I just blew it. 11:59, right? Whatever time it is where you are.
That's right. That's right. Well, good. I really enjoyed this, and I hope people got something out of it.
Well, thank you so much, Doug, for a really informative presentation. And we hope that everyone will continue to monitor different programs that we're going to be doing throughout the year. So follow us on social media and our website. We're so excited to have you. And then, as I mentioned early on, California ReLeaf is doing a economic impact study, and we'd really like your participation of all urban and community forest organizations. So I'm going to put that in the chat, the link to the study. So please visit that, and we'd really love to hear from you. So thank you so much, everyone, and take good care.